Hello, and welcome to episode 74 of the Inventive Marketing Club. We're here every week to help you build a better marketing strategy. On this webinar, we're looking to help improve your productivity at work. So I'm going to share some tips, ideas, and lots of stuff really to help you feel more in control of your projects, emails, and tasks. And basically, I'm going to look at the core concepts that I use every single day. So without further ado, let's get straight into the slides. So there's tons of productivity books, gurus, and systems available out there. I think much of it is fluff, particularly a lot of the books. They're all padded out with waffle. There's very few books that actually truly present new ideas that really work in the way that people live today, particularly, and actually help improve their life and are realistic as well. I think there's lots of ideas where they're not particularly realistic in the way that people work. So what I'm going to do is cover some of the concepts that I use, which have been taken from some of these books. Some I've evolved myself, and I'll give you some recommendations for further reading at the end. The first one I'm going to mention, or the first idea I'm going to mention, is called Getting Things Done. It's actually one of the first productivity books that I read, and I actually did read this one quite some time ago. The original productivity book was based on a paper-based system, really. It wasn't before computers, but it was before computers were really used by everyone, certainly before pocket computers like this. So the whole idea about getting things done is that, first and foremost, you capture everything that occurs to you, whether it's a call from someone or someone you need to call, notes from a meeting, stuff you need to do, actions, and so on. Anything really that occurs to you that pops into your brain, you've got to write it down. You've got to note it in a trusted system. Now, when David Allen wrote this originally, it was, as I said, all paper-based. So he would have a paper-based diary or a notepad that he'd keep in his back pocket just to make all of those notes. The key thing about doing that was it was to remove the little things floating around in your mind so that your mind is more able to help you be more creative, because you're taking away the remembering part of what it has to do and just allowing you to think about the different problems and solutions that you need for all of the projects that you're working on. And I mentioned about the whole workshop here is about productivity for work, but actually I use this system in my home life as well. I use it across everything I do. And what I'll do is I'll go through a few particular ways that I achieve this. Most importantly, though, don't trust your brain. Your brain is really good at finding patterns and solutions to problems, but they will occur at the wrong time when you don't need them. It's terrible at remembering the right information at the right time generally. There are ways that you can help program your brain to do that. For example, if you always go to a certain place to do something, then your brain is going to start building up a habit where the right information is going to start coming forth. So, for example, I think in David Allen's book, people used to have a phone on their desk or in their home, or they used to have a computer room. And so when you go to the phone, your brain's going to start remembering people you need to call. Or when you go and sit at the computer, you might remember the work you need to do or the emails you need to respond to. That doesn't apply now. It certainly doesn't apply now, because we have our computers wherever we are, phones wherever we are, and our notepads wherever we are. So the best thing to do is don't trust your brain is going to bring forth the information you need when you need it. When that information comes up in your brain, you note it down, and then you leave your brain a lot more time to remember, to find the solutions that for the projects that you need or the things you're working on. So the way to do that is you capture everything, whether it's a reminder, a call that you need to make, or you need to write a blog post for something. You note all that down, whatever they are, ideas, actions, thoughts, and you put them in the same place every single time. That's what David means by a trusted system. It's something where when you put it in there, you're going to look at that again and you're going to do something with that information. What you don't want to do is use lots of post-it notes that you put all over your desk in different places in the car, in your bedroom, and you never know where the right bit of information is and where you wrote it down. It's got to be in one place. So I recommend putting it into a notebook that you can carry with you, or I like using Apple Notes, which is on the phone here, or if you've got an Android, I don't know what note system on there, but there will be plenty of note systems, and there's lots of lovely paid for note apps as well, or you might have a fully featured to-do system. The key thing to remember, though, is to make it super easy. What you don't want to do is have a thought and then start to scrabble for the right application to note that thought down in, because by the time you found it, clicked on it, opened up a new task and started typing, your brain's already moved on and you've forgotten that action. So it's got to be something that you do the same every single time, so your brain's not thinking about that. And again, the whole purpose of this is to remove all of those little thoughts sort of free flowing around your mind and corral them into one place to allow your brain to be more creative. So here's a couple of ways I have done it in the past, or that you could use. So the first thing is, get yourself a nice notepad, like these little moleskin notepads. They're quite small. You can keep them in your back pocket or in your bag or jacket. You can keep it with you all the time, wherever you are, whether it's at home, in your bedroom when you're sleeping, or while you're out in the car or working on your desk, you keep it with you. So whenever you have a thought, you note it down. Now, the problem with a notepad is, particularly for me, is I'm lazy. And what I don't want to do is write it into the notepad and then have to copy that out into a digital system later. So what I started doing for a good number of years is using Apple Notes on my iPhone. And I used to have one note. I called it Notey. I used to call it Daybook. Just give it one name, so you're always going to the same place and just adding an item to your bullet point list. And then at the end of the day or every week, I would then take those to-do items or tasks or whatever they are, little memories that come to me, and put them in the right place. And I'll come to that bit in a minute. I've since found another way of managing these little ideas, and it's using shortcuts on the iPhone. Now, shortcuts is just a way of setting up basically automations or very simple programming that allows you to string lots of little actions together. So I've created a little shortcut that just asks me, what's the text? It's not particularly pretty. I could change that to, what would you want to remember? And then it just gives me a text box. And I can either just type in the note or I can dictate in what it is, if I'm in the car. And then when I hit done, it sends me an email. So it just goes into my email system. And the benefit of that is that I know I'm going to be checking my email on a schedule. I will check it daily at work, at least once. So I'm never going to forget that. That item goes into my email and gets processed like everything else. And that's really important for me. It actually saves a lot of time. So rather than putting it in a piece of paper notepad or putting it on my electronic notepad, where I then have to remember to look at that, I'm putting it straight into my email. And I found I've probably been using this particular system for the last 6 months. And I wouldn't say it's revolutionized what I do, but it makes it a lot easier. So once you've found a way of collecting all of these ideas, all of these things that occur to you, or you've been told to do from some other method, and you find a trusted system to put it in, the next thing to do is think about how you process all of that information. And in the Getting Things Done context, David talks about processing your inboxes. So you've got different inboxes. There could be one on your desk, a paper inbox, for example. So, for example, I might have some receipts from things I've posted, or receipts from things I need to claim for, bits of paper bills that might still come through that need to be dealt with. That is my desk inbox. So that tends to go up onto my desk, and I will process that once a week. You might have your capture method. So that could be your notepad, or in my case, it's actually email. So it sort of saves a job there. And you've got email. Email's another inbox, which people can just fill with lots of stuff. And it's a mixture of, tasks from other people, notifications, news reports, lots of different things come into your inbox, your email. So I treat it as an inbox. You've got to make decisions on what to do. You've got to walk from the top to the bottom, making a decision about what to do on every piece of information in any of those inboxes. You don't skip anything, because if you skip something and just put it back into your inbox again, then you're wasting your time, because you have to make a decision about it at some point. And if you can't make a decision about it, maybe the decision is, I'll look at that later. And you purposefully make a time in the future where you are going to make a decision about that. Maybe you need more information. Ideally, you should process your inboxes every day. That might not work for you. You might want to do it each week. And ideally, you should clear them down to 0. So you should look through your email and make decisions about everything that needs to be done in there at least once a day, ideally once a day. And then you move on. You get on with your work. You don't want to live in your inbox. And it's why I don't get on with chat applications like Slack. The problem for me with Slack is that it's designed for you to sit in it all day, have it open as a little application or a window, a tab in your browser, and just constantly get this flood of information, very similar to social media for me. If I'm doing that, I'm constantly being drawn away to lots of other bits of information that are coming in, which may be relevant to the work I'm doing at the moment, but chances are they're not. And really what I need to do, and which is why I like email, is dip into that information, process it, get out what I need, make decisions, and then move on. I would also recommend, and I will come to how you manage your calendar later, setting aside some time for doing this. It's actually quite enjoyable. Maybe that's just me, but I actually quite like making time to go through this information and do something with it. Because when you finish with the end of the day, ideally your brain shouldn't have anything in it, any what David calls open loops, because that means you're going to be constantly thinking about them. It's going to increase your anxiety and stress. So it should be at the end of the day, you've got nothing that your brain is thinking about apart from being creative or looking forward to cooking a nice meal, or the film you're going to watch, or the things you're going to be doing over the next few days. So when you're processing your inbox, these are the questions you need to ask yourself. Firstly, is it actionable? Can I do something about this? So if it is, can I do it? And can I do it now? In GTD, David says, if you can do it in 2 minutes, do it now, because it's going to take you longer to think about, well, which project does it go in? Do I need to rewrite that action to make it more purposeful later? So if you can do it in 2 minutes, just do it, get it done, it's out of the way, and you can move on. Can you delegate it? Are you working with a team of other people or freelancers, or that you can actually pass this task on to? Is it actually for you, or is it just something you're managing? And that's really important. And it might be that you could delegate it to a person, or could you delegate it to an automated system? Could you delegate it to a computer effectively to do that job for you? Maybe I'm trying to think of, maybe you're getting a report on a regular basis, but actually that needs to be sent out to other people. Can we set up some kind of automated system where the report actually goes to the right people at the right time, rather than you having to manage that? Also, it might be actionable, but do we need to defer it to another time? So it is actionable. It's something I need to deal with, but I don't need to deal with it right now. So in which case I can defer that and make a note somewhere in my task system or my calendar to deal with that later. I've actually got the email system I'm using actually helps manage that as well. So I'll come back to that. So is it actionable? Yes. So either do it, delegate it, or defer it to later. If it's not actionable, can I delete it? Is it something I actually need? If it's not, delete it, get rid of it, move on. We don't need to keep that sort of information floating around. Is it reference material? Is a client, we get it a lot when we're building websites, clients will send you lots of information. So it could be a Word file with a homepage copy in it. It could be some images they've taken of an event they've been running. Whatever it is, do I need to do anything with it right now? No, it's reference material. So I need to put that in the appropriate place. So if it's for a website project, can I put that in the website project and maybe then add an action against that to say, review reference material, or look through photos to decide which are the best, whatever the appropriate action is. Or just put it as reference, something you've been told you just need it for later. On a personal note, it could be something like some tickets to an exhibition. So we, like many people, have been to the Harry Potter or Warner Brothers studios, and you have to book so far in the future that you forget about where your tickets are. So what I used to do is when you buy the tickets, they're going to come through straight away. I can mark those tickets to come back into my inbox so that I've got them on the day when we're actually going and they're ready for me. If you can't do that, then you can put a calendar entry in with maybe just the reference code you need in there. You then don't need to think about them again. You don't need to scurry to find the tickets or the QR code when you're actually coming to the exhibition or wherever you're attending. I use it a lot, particularly for events that I'm going to. I'll often put the event code or references in the calendar entry, so I don't have to look that up at the time. So reference material at some point later in the future, it's worth sort of pulling out what you need and then putting it into the right space for later. An incubate, this is where you have an idea, but you don't know whether it's useful right now, but you think it could be quite useful. You need somewhere to put it so that when you've got time, maybe it's ideally for this is Christmas time for me, because we tend to slow down. We've got a bit more time available. Clients are, winding down themselves. So this is the time when I might actually come back to some of this material where these are ideas, things we'd like to do. And you need a space to put those where at some point you're going to go back to them. So this could be programs you want to watch on TV, films you want to see, books you want to read, things you want to do. You need one list which you can put everything into, which when you've got time, you will come back to that. I think David Allen calls it a sometime maybe list. And it's quite good. You can just dump stuff in there, maybe every 3 months, every month, whenever works for you. You review that and you might actually look at it and go, oh, I've done some of those things, let's get rid of them. Or actually, I'm never going to read that book, let me get rid of it. So key thing, decide if it's actionable and then take an action. And that process for me helps so much in actually getting all those little tasks done. Another key thing, and I actually set time aside for this in my calendar, is a weekly review. So this is where you look over your project task lists, any follow-ups you've got. So I've got people that we've sent quotes to, or where they're looking for us to do some work. So I need to follow up with them, check in on those, and then looking at the calendar, what specific things have I got coming up this week or maybe next week that I need to be aware of? So maybe I've got a client call here. Have I done the work that I need to do for that client call? I've got a presentation maybe next Tuesday. Have I got all the notes for the presentation? Do I know where it is if I'm traveling there? And just basically just wandering through what's going to be happening over the next week or so. I actually love this time. I set aside half a morning to do this, and I go through all of our projects in Basecamp. I kind of walk through the main ones. I've kind of highlighted the ones that I'm working on currently. If I have time, I'll then work on ones that are maybe dormant, where we're not working on anything. Maybe there's something I could be doing for the client and generating more business, perhaps. And then the calendar as well. Certainly looking through the week ahead, specifically paying attention to things that are immovable, things that are going to happen, and I need to prepare for them. They're the key things. There's other bits of things where events where they can be moved around. Maybe we can reschedule them, but now's a good time to do it. And talking of rescheduling, what you don't want to be stuck with is a calendar where you feel, oh, I'm obligated to all of these things. If you suddenly realize you've got a busy week at the beginning of the week or the week before, now's the time to think about changing those obligations, because you're not late if you haven't arrived for that meeting yet, because that meeting's on Thursday. You've got time to rearrange things if you're busy and moving your week around. So I find this time invaluable for doing that, this weekly review, because it gives me the time to step back and think about how I want my week to look. And if I need to reschedule, it's totally fine to do that most of the time. There's some things where maybe that event has taken, it's a presentation. So you've got to turn up because other people are booked to come and watch you. Or you're delivering something, there's something real time happening, or maybe that meeting's taken a lot of time to set up. But a lot of things can be rescheduled. And most of the time, I find that some people are often thankful for you rescheduling because they're quite busy anyway. So the other thing to do in your weekly review is time to, if you haven't caught up on your inboxes, just make sure they're all cleared down, and sort of noting down next actions for projects. That's actually a really good concept in GTD, the thought of a next action. You don't need to think about everything you need to do for a particular project. Just think about the next action. How can I make this project or this task I need to do move forward? Just think about the smallest thing that you can do to nudge it forward. It could be as simple as, so I've got a great task at the moment. The battery in our car is failing. So I need to get that changed, or charged or checked. But there's a couple of other things that were low on the list, like the brake pads just need checking as well. And there may be a few other things on the car list that need doing. So the next action for me is to call the garage and book a slot to check. There's so many more actions that I need to do for the car, but that's the first thing I need to do. So I'll put in either a general task that I can get around to when I get around to it, or I can actually put a time in the calendar to make sure I do that. And definitely plan for the week ahead. But if you've got time, start looking at the next 2 weeks, 3 weeks, the month ahead, because you'll be amazed at how much you start actually pre-planning. And get your brain, now it's cleared of all those little actions, get your brain starting to think about things that you need in the future. Now, I'm not perfect in any of this, but given the amount of clients that I work with and work that I deal with and different types of things that I do, I would not be able to manage it. And I think I'd go crazy if I didn't have a really good way of taking that from here, putting it in the right place. Something else that's really good to do in the weekly review is to look back at the past week or 2 weeks. You might have forgotten to write up some notes, and it happens to the best of us, from a meeting you had, or maybe something in your calendar will remind you about some potential work that you could do for a client. So it's not just about getting your work done. There's also opportunities for looking for more business, depending on the type of industry you're in. So the weekly review is particularly precious to me, and I do set aside that time in my calendar. So I just thought I'd drop this particular slide in here. David runs a podcast where it's lots of material from some of the workshops that he's delivered, plus lots of thoughts from him as well. I think it's a really good podcast, even if you're not into getting things done, because there's lots of little nuggets and ideas. And I recommend you subscribing to that. It's not a particularly pretty URL, but that will take you straight there. Otherwise, just search for Getting Things Done on Google and look for the podcast tab. So moving on from getting things done, the next thing I think is in sort of productivity is email. Email can be a real sap of time, particularly if you have it on all the time and notifications are popping up, grabbing your attention and sucking you back into email. Now, email for me used to be so exciting. I could say really decades ago now, when you get a new email, it would be exciting because you wouldn't get many of them. So you'd maybe check your email maybe once a day, maybe a couple of times a week. Now, that's it. I mean, it's not just email, it's Slack, which I consider the same thing. It's just real time. It's social media, which is very similar. It's messages on WhatsApp or Apple Messages. So you've got all of this stuff coming in from different places, and you've just got to find a way to manage it. So particularly with email, don't worry about filing everything, because you're spending your time for the majority of it not really benefiting from that filing that you've just done. You just spend a lot of time moving things to the right folder or adding labels to things. And I find over-categorization not only slows you down when you're adding information or processing information, but when you come to find it, if you've got too many folders or labels, it just becomes too confusing. So what I do, and I believe me, I've tried lots of methods from when I was using, back in the old days with Outlook, I would have multiple folders for each client, and then for each client and project. So we'd have client, and then in there we'd have all the projects we're working on. And I tried lots of different systems like that. I just spent far too long archiving it or filing it away, and then trying to find that information later when I needed it. So just don't worry about it. Just archive it. Just either use an archive button in your email program or drag it to the archive folder. Get it out of your inbox if you've dealt with it, which you would have because you've been going through processing your inbox, and just move it there. If you need it again, then you can search for it. Talking of searching, when you send emails to people, write the subject line so that you can find it later. Try and write a clear subject line that describes what the email is about. Try not to use website or help needed as a subject line. Or I've just seen nothing. Sometimes people just put nothing in there. So when you reply, it just goes colon, and there's nothing after it. How are you meant to find that email later? So try and think about your future self and write the subject line with enough information, but not too long, so that you can find it later. You could almost think about it like keywords. So you could put in a couple of keywords. So I tend to put maybe the client's project in there, or if it's like a little ad hoc job we're doing, maybe the specific aspect of the ad hoc job if I need to do that. Just so we got a few keywords and tags within that so we can find it later. That's going to help you, and it's going to help your client or your colleague or your friend, because when that email comes through, they know what it's about. They don't look at it and go, it's another email from Jim. And maybe Jim gives them a lot of things to do, and they've got another email with nothing in the subject line, or just help me, or website, or simple things like that. So think about helping other people, but you by doing that. Also along those lines, only include the people who need to see it. I find we don't get it so much with our clients, but I do find if I'm working with big organizations, a lot of people are copied into something or they're mentioned on something. And I think Basecamp sometimes exacerbates this a little bit as well if people aren't actually clicking on the people that need to get this message, because people can be included who don't need to action it or see it. And the problem is when that comes through as an email, they're spending time looking at it, reading it, going, what do I need to do in this? And so actually, I would say don't send it to people that don't need to see it if you can possibly avoid it. And if they do, maybe at the top go, this is mainly for reference, but Jim and Alice, there are some actions for you in here. Be specific. Try and help people out. So when they look at it, Jim will see his name and instantly spend attention doing it. Whereas other people are just going to go, right, that's for reference. Great, I can move that to one side. And finally, with email, try and filter it away. So if you're constantly making the same decision, such as, oh, this is a receipt, I need to put it in this folder, or I need to send it to Xero, our account system, for example. Why keep doing the same action? See if you can automate it. Most email programs give you some way of doing that. It depends on what you're using. The current email system I'm using doesn't have that filtering, but I found another way of doing it by sort of sending the email somewhere else, getting that to be filtered, and then it comes back into my email box. But Gmail certainly has a very good filtering system. Outlook also has a very good rules system, as does Macmail. So if you are doing repetitive tasks with your email, sending it to someone else or filing it somewhere or forwarding it onto another system, try and automate that, because the more you can get rid of that email, the better. And actually, something I haven't got on here, but is so important, is unsubscribe from newsletters that you do not read. If you are constantly getting annoyed by Amazon sending you a roundup of the latest offers and you never want it, but you get frustrated by it every single time you see it, unsubscribe. And if you can't unsubscribe from something, set a filter or a rule to delete it. Get rid of it. You don't need it. You're wasting time on it. And every single email you've got in your inbox is a little bit of time that your brain is spending processing that. Get rid of them. The most powerful thing I've done is to go through, and this was a good few years ago now, probably 5 years ago, is to go through my email and look for newsletters that I don't read and unsubscribe from them. It was incredibly valuable, and you get so much time back. So here's a couple of screenshots of various different email programs. In the middle, we've got Gmail. which you might be using personally as Gmail, or you might be using through Google Workspaces at work. And until recently, we were actually using Gmail. I've just highlighted a couple of sections here. The first little box for Gmail is a little, I don't know, little box with a down arrow. You click on that and it'll archive your message. So once you've dealt with it, you click archive and that goes into the one single archive box. You can add labels and things like that, but I never bothered in the end because, again, it's just, I never seem to use them in the future. And then you've got a big search box at the top. Google search is incredibly good in Gmail, very good at finding things. So, you know, it would not only search the title, but you could search any particular labels if you added them, but also the content of the email. And it usually came up with the right thing. So Gmail, very good system for searching. Mac Mail, that had the same thing as well. You've got a little archive button. Again, it just looks like a little archive paper box folder, really. You click on that and it will just whisk away to the archive folder, and you've got a search box. It worked pretty well. I didn't think the search was quite as good as Gmail, but actually it was fine. I never really had a problem with it. But we don't use either of those now. We use Hey, and Hey doesn't have an archive button. Basically, once you've read it and done something with it, it's just archived. It just kind of moves to a space out of your what they call inbox. Yes, it's not spelled incorrectly. It's called inbox. So you don't need, it's another thing you don't need to think about. You just do something with it, read it, move it to reply later, or some of the things I'll talk about in a minute. And then it will just automatically move to what is effectively an archive space. But they do have a search, and the search is pretty good now. So you can type in a few keywords. That usually does the job to bring it up. Otherwise, it gives you some filters to refine that by who sent it, what time, and so on. So this is a little screenshot of Gmail. If you go into settings and then filters and blocked addresses, it's got a very powerful way of filtering and basically doing stuff with your email. So for example, I've got one where if it sees out of office in there, just delete it, because I don't need to see if it's out of office. Because often I'll send people a message and you get out of office. I'm not necessarily chasing people up most of the time, and if I am, it's going to be a week later. Most people are back from whatever they're doing within a week, so I don't need to see that out of office. Very occasionally, maybe I might follow them up. I'll get and you know, I can dig into the out of office if I need it, because that deleted item stays there for 30 days. But I want that out of my way. Receipts for payments, well, I send them on to invoices@inventive.com. That'll get forwarded to our Xero system. So basically, I'm trying to think ahead. What am I doing with my emails on a regular basis? And if I'm doing the same thing, can I put a filter in place that does that for me? So that's really good. Gmail does that really well. And then there's Hey Email, which we've moved to. I think we've been with Hey a year. I started using it personally, and we've now moved the whole company over to it. And I love it, frankly. I mean, it actually makes, for me, I should really ask Claire what she thinks of using Hey, but I love it. It makes my life so much easier, and actually makes email. It takes me back 20 years to when email was fun. And the reason is you don't have to archive. It just does it. It just auto archives it. And then you can also get things to auto delete. So if you get lots of little notifications, which you need to know about, but you don't need to keep, you can set them to what they call recycle. So you can set them to recycle after 30 days or 2 years. And you know that maybe you read that little notification, that update, you go, yeah, I've read it. It will just move into this previously seen area. And you know it's going to be deleted after 30 days. So it's not going to hang around. And I love that. I'm quite particular about what I keep in my email and not what I don't. Brilliant. You've got a reply later section. Now, I use this all the time. Someone sends me an email. I read it. Oh, I've got to do something with that. I have to reply to them. It's an action I need to put into Basecamp, for example, but I can't right now because I'm just triaging. So I go through and I click reply later. That moves it to a special place where I can come back to that maybe later in the day, maybe at the end of the day, or the next day. Usually I do that in the morning. I will go through and use the reply later feature. And you'll see there's a little graphic on the left-hand side called focus and reply. So you can go into this mode where it's got a list of emails on the left and a little reply box on the right-hand side. And what I can do is I can just flick through those and go, actually, no, I don't need to reply to that, or I've already dealt with that. So I can just, just mark that as done. Or I can type in a message like in this example that Hey have provided. Thanks, Jasmina. Yeah, I'll get on with that. Hit send and it's done. And then it even moves it up and puts a nice little tick to say it's sent. And that, that in itself, those little touches make using email a pleasure, I find. You can add notes to emails. So maybe I need to just add a little note about what this email is, because perhaps I've had a call with that person. I can just add it straight onto that email. And it looks almost like a little email message that I'm sending to myself, but it's attached to that email and obviously looks slightly different. It's in a different color. But I can even also do them when working with Claire, that we can actually share emails with each other and share notes that recipient won't see. Not that we're going to be rude behind their back, but we use that if we're organizing something. So a lot of people coming onto this club, Claire might be doing most of the organizing, but maybe there's a question. So she can then copy me in with a question on there, which only I see. I can reply to Claire, or I can reply back to that person straight away. That's super useful. And there's nothing else that I know of that does that so easily. And this is a big one for me. You can change the bloody subject line. So if someone puts in nothing or website, I can type over what that subject line is. So I know everything is referenced, has got a proper reference to it. But interestingly, it doesn't change the email for other people. So if someone sends me an email with website as the title, or website help, or website question mark, I can change that to actually what we're talking about, actually what we're working on, or actually what help they need. But the subject line doesn't change for them. So their email thread doesn't break in their email system, but it's all referenced and filed correctly for me. I love it. Okay, I'm a bit particular about that sort of thing, but I love it. You can filter off transactional emails. So say, for example, you get a lot of receipts. You can automate those senders to go into a paper trail. It's what they call a paper trail. It's quite a cutesy name. Hey, or the makers of Hey or Basecamp, or the same people who make Basecamp. They like their cutesy names, but actually it's really good. You can just get all of your sort of receipts or transactional information that you don't really need to see on a regular basis, but you do need. You can just filter them off into paper trail. You've got to be careful though, because there are sometimes some companies who send everything all on the same email address. So they'll send important notifications as well as just invoices. And so you've got to be careful then about filtering everything off to paper trail. And finally, although there's loads more to Hey, but to be honest, I could do a whole webinar on it. There's bubble up if no reply. Now they've got this concept called bubble up, which is basically remind me later. So if you, for example, with the Harry Potter tickets, those tickets come through, I can click bubble up, pick the date we're going, and I know that email is going to pop back into my inbox. It's going to bubble up to the top on that date. Perfect. It works every time, and it means my brain can forget about it because it knows it's going to come back. Bubble up if no reply is brilliant for following up. I always found following up emails really tough. I'd have to make notes in a different system to remind me to follow up. What this allows me to do is I can send an email, which perhaps it's usually to do with a quote or that sort of initial stage where we're getting to know a customer. And I've got a certain process where I need to follow up on those things. Well, I can send and get it to bubble up if they don't reply. So I can put bubble up if no reply next week. So I can send my quote on a Monday, hit bubble up if no reply, and I don't need to worry about thinking about whether to follow up with them until next week. If they reply in the meantime, however, it's going to cancel that bubbling up process because it'll come back into my inbox again with their reply and I can continue that process. That has been wonderful. It's a real time saver, and it's all about just taking those little things off out of your brain so you don't need to think about them. It's great. I mean, Hey, you have to pay for Hey. It's a very reasonable price, but I found it to be absolutely worthwhile in terms of the amount of time it saves and the weight it takes off my brain. Let's move on from that. Right, default diary. This is a great one. So I got this idea from Action Coach. Used to be part of Action Coach for a couple of years when we started. And one of the core concepts they gave me, or Simon gave me from Action Coach, was a default diary. And this is where you set out what your week's going to look like. So you put in the things that you need to do generally. And it's not, they're not necessarily to do with specific projects, but they're things where you need to set aside time. So you can see, for example, we've got the weekly review in there on a Monday. We've also got incubator follow-ups. Incubator is what I call the project that manages all of the potential clients that we're working with. So I'm kind of incubating that and keeping it going until they're ready to hatch like little chickens. So I always put a little bit of time in that for following up, and then the rest of it is weekly review. I also plan in for specific to-do times. I've got some marketing time in here. It's slightly changed from this particular one. This was 2 years ago. What we actually do now is Claire and I have some marketing time after the webinar. So we set that aside. We know we're going to be online together. We set aside that time so we can just roll into marketing because it's very relevant. I also have regular client meetings. So we've got our coaching where we help clients with their SEO, website development or marketing. Well, I've got regular meetings set aside of them. So one client might be the first Thursday of every month. Another one might be the second Tuesday in the afternoon. I've kind of pre-booked those out into the future. So I know I'm not going to overschedule myself. And that makes a huge difference because when I come to the end of having our monthly session, I can say, when should we next meet? Well, we already know when the date's going to be because it's already in the diary. So we just need to confirm that date and move on or change it if need be. But again, just takes the weight away from you. You just don't have to think because you've already thought about it and that decision just goes on into the future. I also would recommend sharing your calendar with your team, if possible, if that allows, or with your partner, or whoever you're working with or living with, because the more they can see of what you're doing, the more they're not going to book things when you're already busy, or they can work around you. It's a lot easier. I certainly use this a lot at home. Trying to sort of, when we know we've got friends coming over, that's blocked in the diary. If we're going out somewhere, that's blocked in the diary. All the kids' things are blocked in the diary. So I know my work and home life coexist really nicely because I can see them all on one thing. So default diary is brilliant. Just pre-think about your obligations you're going to have into the future that are recurring and put them in, because then you're never scurrying around to find time, well, generally, unless you get busy. Talking of time, don't be a time thief and don't let others steal it from you. So what I mean by that is request short meetings. Don't try and, it's fine if you wanted a long meeting, but if you're in a meeting with lots of other people, that multiplies up the time for everyone and the cost for everyone. And those other people might be busy. So don't try and request long meetings. I try not to, and I know that I can ramble a lot, so I try. It's often better for me to have a shorter meeting because we can get over stuff pretty quickly. But there is time and place to have the time ahead of you to discuss ideas and concepts. But generally, try and keep meetings short, particularly if they're updates where you just want to run through actions, make sure everyone's done what they're going to do and move on. Try and write emails or action requests which don't require further clarification. So if you need someone to do something, maybe you've got Google Search Console has sent you an email alert and you go, I need my web developer to deal with that. Don't just forward it on to them. I'm giving you a particular example I can think of for us, but don't just forward it on to them and expect that person to look through and figure out what's going on, what needs to happen here. Try and give some kind of action. What expectations do you have of that person? So when you send it over and goes, can you help with this? Or are you able to manage this for me? Try and be more specific about what you're trying to do rather than just forwarding things. Luckily, most of our clients don't do that. When you're writing emails, again, keep those short. Try and use bullet points. I think once you're working with people regularly, they will know you're not being rude. I think sometimes when you're starting to build that relationship, you want to add a bit more flower. You want to add a few more words in there just so it's a bit more conversational. But I think once you've got a relationship, certainly a working relationship, let them know that you're going to be brief, and that's saving them time. Set a do not disturb time. So set a time when you're not going to be disturbed. whenever works for you. Maybe you work really well in the morning, in which case you want to set do not disturb on your computer, on your phone, for phone calls, messages, and everything like that. Just turn it all off so you can focus on your work. Because if you're constantly being distracted by notifications, emails, or phone calls, you're not going to be able to have that nice stream of consciousness that's going to allow you to be creative in whatever you do. And just going back to the calendar system, plan in time for email and social media. Don't just have it on in the background. Don't just dip into it. And I know it's hard because I suffer that same problem. There's always something exciting, or has so-and-so replied. Don't do it. Don't be tempted. Set time aside for it. I try and work to having email in the morning and social media in the morning, just to check for you a few things. And then maybe just before lunch, in case there's anything I need to deal with right now, and just before I finish work. They're the key times when I check it. Be your own admin. This is an idea that came from the book A World Without Email, which we discussed on a previous webinar. I mean, there's lots in this particular book, but the idea of being your own admin is a really interesting concept that I was kind of half doing, but now I know this, I'm doing it a lot more. Now, the idea in the book is don't have your nose in the data stream all the time. So don't be checking email all the time or Slack. Stay away from that. If you need to be checking that regularly, get someone else to do it. Get someone who can manage your administration. If you can't do that, or it's not worth your while doing that, certainly if you're starting up, it's going to be costly to do that, but we don't really need to do that here. You can be your own admin. You can set aside time using the default diary method to look through all of your tasks, notes, chats, calls, all the stuff coming in, and putting it into the right places. And I find that so useful to really think about how I'm going to help the other me, the person who's doing the work. I think about my project-based self as someone else. And I think, what can I do to help them? So when I get an email through from a client and they're giving me some information, I don't just dump that somewhere I'm going to maybe look at later. I take what I need from that and put it directly into the Basecamp project that we're working on. Obviously, you'll have your own system, but you put it into the place where you will need it later. Your other self who's being creative will need it later. If you've had some call notes, you put those call notes into the right place and you say, what are the actions from that? Let me make sure those actions are set up as tasks. Let me see if I can get any reference material that's going to help me with those tasks, and put it all in the right place. So you don't have to be dipping in and out of email all the time. Because even if you're diligent about just checking email at the beginning of the day or maybe the end of the day, if you are going into your email or you're going into your chat app like Slack to find information that you've referenced or starred, you will, and I know you will do this, you'll go and start reading other email and start replying to it. So the best thing to do is when you do check, put that information in the right place so your creative self can deal with it later. This, and knowing this idea, such a simple idea, is kind of transformational really in terms of how I think about work. I've got my admin self, and I quite like that because I'm quite particular about things being in order, and I've got my creative self, and I try and keep them separate. Talking about being particular about things, as a programmer, there's a good concept, which is to don't write it twice. So don't actually, or don't code twice, don't duplicate yourself. Lazy programmers do this, and lazy programmers tend to be good programmers because they're always thinking about consolidating things and making things run as fast or efficiently as possible. So save time and reduce mistakes by trying to think, if you're going to do something again that you're repeatedly doing, like for me, sending quotes and sending these little introduction emails in here, where I'm saying, hi, Brian, here's the information, here's the quote along with this. If you need any help, look at our website or reply back. I'll check up with you next week. That's a general formula I'm doing quite regularly for quotes. I don't want to make spelling mistakes in there. Believe me, I do. I do make them all the time. So I need to remove those mistakes and find a way of repeating myself in a quick and efficient way. So I use two applications for doing this. The first one, which most people should be able to use on an iPhone, I guess an Android has something similar, is to have text shortcuts. So this is the image on the right-hand side. This is actually the image from the Mac, but you can do similar things on the iPhone, and it will synchronize between the two. You can put in little shortcuts. So we've got a couple of shortcuts there. If I want to put in my phone number, I just type in BKPH and then it changes that to my phone number. I've even got one, it's not actually on this one, but for Zoom calls. So if I want to just give out my Zoom room, I can just type in BKZO and it swaps that out for my Zoom room. I can put on my way, if I'm just running late from somewhere, I can just put OMW. I think that's one of the default ones. And you can add in anything you want there. I mean, you've got to keep it relatively short, but you can add your little default messages in there and it will just replace your little short bit of text with the longer piece of text you specified. The other application you can use is Text Expander. I'm showing the Mac application on the right-hand side, but I believe they have a PC application as well. So what's good about Text Expander is you can take those text shortcuts even further. So I use this all the time for stuff that I'm replying to where it's a common message I need to send to that person. So I gave the example of a quote. So with a quote, I'm going to want the basics covered off in there. So I've got a little shortcut, I don't know if we can see it in there, which is just QU. So I just open up a new email message, type in QU, and it just pops in that information, everything I need. I've got one that's showing up on screen here, which is to request feedback. So I type in REFE, and it then pops in the text that says, to remain accountable for our work, we ask our customers to rate our service, ... I think it's changed from that particular one. But the nice thing about this is I can focus on refining these snippets, particularly for your sales funnel. I can refine these snippets just to get them to be the right text that works for us, that's brief, that's friendly. And I can refine that over time rather than worrying about going back to a previous email to find that text, making spelling mistakes or missing out things that are really important. So having some way of automating the text that you're sending out is amazing. So I find this really useful. If you don't want to buy an app, there's no reason why you can't copy and paste some of this text into a note file or a Word document or a text file and just leave that handy so you can just open it and copy and paste the information in. But the key thing is just to think about what are you doing on a regular basis and what can you automate or what can you take from a template so you're not having to think about that every single time. Just finishing off now, this is another idea that I've got from Action Coach, and it's basically don't make excuses and take responsibility. If you've made a mistake, someone's got to take responsibility for that. It's ideally, it should be you, unless it really is someone else's mistake, but someone has to take responsibility for it. Even if it's not your mistake, you've got to take responsibility to move things forward. Certainly with a project, maybe something is causing the project to be late. It's the client's fault, not your fault. What are you going to do? You can sit and blame the client, but that's not really going to achieve anything. You want to think about, well, how can I take responsibility and move that forward? What alternatives do we have now? Basically, just get on with it. And the concept from Action Coach comes of being above the line. So they think about this red line, and below the line, there is blame, where you are looking to make it someone else's fault. Above the line, there is accountability, where even if it's not your fault, you will manage it. You will be accountable for that. And I think this particular concept really helped me just in my personal life many years ago. When I was doing a lot more traveling, I was often late back home. And this would be a real problem because I'd get back home, the children were young, and my wife would be like pulling her hair out because the kids were screaming. And, she had just had enough and just needed a break. And so really wanted me back. So I always thought, well, I was late because there was too much traffic, or I was late because the client was talking too much, or any number of reasons. But the fact is I was still late. Someone's got to be accountable for that. And until I make myself accountable for that, nothing is going to change. So when I started to see this, and over a number of times I'd actually see this slide, I started to think, well, yeah, I can blame the traffic. I can blame the client for me being late, but ultimately I'm late. I have to find a way of getting home on time. And it could be getting home on time. It could be getting to a meeting on time, whatever it might be. But you've got to take responsibility for it. From that point, pretty much after that, I was home on time because I was starting to think ahead. I couldn't just let the client to take away my time so I didn't have so much time to get home, I would let them know in advance what time I needed to be home. And then the client would actually help me. You know, that person in the meeting would actually help me finish the call. I'd often get people going, oh, you've got to leave. So they would be in with me on this. I wouldn't tell them the reason why I needed to be back. I just was very specific about taking responsibility for that. And this makes a huge difference in terms of being productive, because I think productivity is all about owning the project, being accountable for things so you can manage things, and not just letting other people, you know, not waiting for someone else to remind you of something. You've got to take responsibility. And finally, I find this really useful. Try and get some exercise. You know, get away from your desk. You don't need much exercise, but walking is super good. I do some cardio exercise as well, but to be honest, walking every day would be really good. Sadly, our dog's getting a little bit older, so she doesn't need as much walking, but we still try and get out there. I even have at times over lunchtime, just walk around the garden, just walking in a big loop, listening to a podcast for 15 minutes. It really helps me just to break away from the work that I'm doing and just get some oxygen into my brain, helps me think, helps me be more creative. But ideally, try and make a habit of that exercise. And also try and get sleep. Becomes easier. When I wrote this, my sleep patterns were much better. As you get older, they get disrupted and more frustrating. But try and make a habit of getting a regular amount of sleep, or 7 to 8 hours, they say, is ideal, but as much as you need. Whatever you do, make it a habit. Make sleep an enjoyable process. And finally, I'm just going to leave you with some recommendations, some recommended reading and listening, some of my fave Audible books. So we've got Getting Things Done. I've put them in order here as well. So I recommend Getting Things Done and A World Without Email. 2 very great books. Getting Things Done, one of the first ones I read. A World Without Email, one of the most recent, but I'd say they're both core books. And then 2 books from the people behind Basecamp, or 37 Signals as they're known, Rework, and It Doesn't Have to Be Crazy at Work. Both of those will give you not only lots of concepts in terms of productivity, but just running your business. Both very good things there. 2 other books, Sprint, and this is from, I think it's behind the people who run Google Ventures, but it's how to basically, they call it solve big problems and test new ideas in just 5 days. But there's lots of little ideas in there about being productive, overcoming hurdles. So there's lots of stuff you'll get out of that, but in terms of productivity, some great things. And The Dip by Seth Godin. Now, Seth Godin has written lots of interesting books, but The Dip really gets you to focus on thinking about, if you're going to do something, you want to basically push past this dip that everyone comes across. Let's say you've got professional tennis players. Well, professional tennis players found playing tennis super hard until they're trained so much they're at the top of their game and they've pushed past the dip. Everyone else is going to be at the bottom of the dip because they find it super hard and give up. So with The Dip, the concept is to find the things that are worth fighting for and push forward to get to the top of your game, or don't do it at all. So I'm going to stop sharing there. I think that was pretty good. I think there's a nice update to the webinar we ran quite early on when we were doing this, with some of the new concepts that I use now. So before we sign off, Claire, perhaps you'd talk about what's coming up next.
Yes, so next week, Ben, you're going to be demonstrating Ninja forms, particularly the multi-step lead form, which will help people with their funneling their sales.
Yeah, so this is really good. It's one of the plugins I touched on when we were walking through the WordPress plugins webinar. I'm just looking at all the plugins I use, but we need to spend a bit more time on this because Ninja forms and other plugins like them really, there's lots of useful ways you can use forms on your website to encourage sales and just get more done. So that's going to be a good one. So we're here every Friday from 10 a.m. We cover everything in marketing strategy, social, SEO, video, and a little bit of productivity from time to time. If you've got something exciting to share, email Claire at support@ratherinventive.com. And don't forget, you can catch up with all the previous webinars on ratherinventive.com/membership. Thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you next week. Bye.